The history of cocaine. So here's a fun fact. There was a time when you could literally buy cocaine at the pharmacy, mix it into your wine, and your doctor would congratulate you on your excellent health choices. Wild, right? But that's just the tip of the iceberg lettuce that nobody was eating because they were too busy doing cocaine. Today, we're diving into the absolutely bonkers history of cocaine, a substance that went from sacred plant to miracle medicine to beloved soft drink ingredient to public enemy number one, all in the span of about 100 years. This is a story involving ancient civilizations, one very enthusiastic neurologist named Sigmund Freud, the Pope's personal wine, and the most aggressive marketing campaign in pharmaceutical history. Buckle up. Let's rewind about 5,000 years. High in the Andes Mountains of South America, indigenous peoples discovered something interesting about a particular plant with glossy leaves, the coca plant. And no, before you ask, this has nothing to do with cocoa, the chocolate stuff. Different plant entirely. Though honestly, the confusion probably worked in Coca-Cola's favor later. The people of the Andes, including the Inca civilization, figured out that chewing these leaves gave them energy, suppressed hunger, and helped them deal with the brutal reality of living at extremely high altitudes where the air is thin enough to make you feel like you're breathing through a coffee stirrer. They weren't extracting pure cocaine or anything crazy, they were just chewing the leaves, which is roughly as intense as drinking a strong cup of coffee, maybe an espresso. For these cultures, coca wasn't just a pick-me-up, it was sacred. The Inca reserved it for nobility, priests, and special ceremonies. It was currency, medicine, and a direct connection to the divine. Coca leaves were so important that they were buried with the dead. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old mummies with pouches of coca leaves, which really puts "don't forget to pack snacks for the afterlife" into perspective. The indigenous people had a whole system worked out. They'd chew the leaves with a bit of alkaline substance, usually from crushed shells or ash, which helped release the active compounds. They used it for everything: altitude sickness, toothaches, hunger suppression during long journeys, and staying awake during all-night religious ceremonies. Basically, they invented the energy drink about 5,000 years before Red Bull showed up. Fast forward to the 1500s. The Spanish conquistadors show up in South America, looking for gold and generally making everyone's life miserable. At first, the Spanish were not impressed by coca. The Catholic Church initially condemned it as the devil's leaf because it was used in indigenous religious ceremonies. And we all know how the church felt about other people's religions. But then something interesting happened. The Spanish noticed that the indigenous people they'd enslaved to work in silver mines could work longer hours in brutal conditions if they were given coca leaves. Suddenly, the devil's leaf became extremely useful. The church did a complete 180 and started taxing coca production. Nothing changes moral opinions quite like a profitable business opportunity. The Spanish tried to keep coca in South America, but word started spreading to Europe about this mysterious leaf. For centuries, though, nobody in Europe really cared that much. Coca leaves don't travel well, they lose their potency quickly when dry, and Europeans couldn't figure out what all the fuss was about. They tried it and felt almost nothing. It would be like if someone hyped up coffee for centuries, and when you finally tried it, it was decaf. Disappointing. Here's where things get spicy. In the mid-1800s, chemistry was having its moment. Scientists were isolating active compounds from plants left and right. They'd already figured out morphine from opium poppies, and everyone was very excited about that until they realized morphine was maybe a bit too exciting, if you know what I mean. In 1855, a German chemist named Friedrich Gajka managed to isolate the alkaloid from coca leaves. But the real breakthrough came in 1859 when Albert Niemann, another German chemist, improved the process and gave the compound its name, cocaine. He also helpfully noted that it made his tongue go numb, which any decent scientist would obviously discover by tasting their mysterious white powder. Different times. Suddenly, cocaine was everywhere in Europe and America. And I mean everywhere. Pharmaceutical companies started producing it, and doctors started prescribing it for absolutely everything. Feeling tired? Cocaine. Feeling sad? Cocaine. Got a toothache? Cocaine. Your child is teething? Baby cocaine. And yes, that last one is real. They made cocaine drops for teething babies. The Victorian era was wild. The beauty of pure cocaine, from a Victorian perspective, was that it worked fast and it worked well. Unlike just chewing coca leaves, which gave you a mild buzz, pure cocaine was immediate and powerful. It made people feel energetic, confident, happy, and ready to tackle the world. Side effects? What side effects? Those would be future society's problem. We need to talk about Sigmund Freud, because no history of cocaine would be complete without discussing how the father of psychoanalysis was absolutely zooted on cocaine while developing his theories. This is not a joke. In the 1,880 seconds, young Freud was a struggling neurologist trying to make a name for himself. He read about cocaine and thought, "This could be my ticket to fame." He started experimenting with it mostly on himself and became convinced he'd discovered a miracle drug. He wrote a paper called Uber Coca, which was basically a love letter to cocaine. He called it a magical substance and recommended it for depression, sexual dysfunction, addiction to morphine and alcohol, and basically any problem humans could have. Freud was taking cocaine regularly, giving it to his friends, sending it to his fiancée in the mail, romantic, and evangelizing about it to anyone who would listen. He claimed it made him feel wonderful and had absolutely no downsides. For a while, he looked like a genius. Cocaine did help people feel better, temporarily. Then one of his friends, Ernst von Fleischl-Marxau, who Freud had convinced to use cocaine to wean off morphine, became absolutely addicted to cocaine and had a psychotic episode. Freud slowly backed away from his cocaine advocacy, though he personally kept using it for years. He quietly removed some of his more enthusiastic recommendations from later editions of his work, which is the academic equivalent of deleting your old tweets. The irony is that while Freud missed out on the fame he wanted from cocaine, he did become famous for psychoanalysis, a field where he could talk about cocaine and his patients could talk about their cocaine without anyone actually doing cocaine. Growth. While Freud was having his cocaine arc, America was experiencing what can only be described as the patent medicine free-for-all. This was an era before the FDA, before drug regulations, before anyone really asked, should we? Everyone was just asking, could we? The answer apparently was yes to everything. Companies were putting cocaine in tonics, elixirs, wines, and medicines, often without listing it on the label. There was cocaine toothache drops, which promised instantaneous cure. There was Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup for children, which contained morphine. There were cocaine-infused cigarettes marketed as throat lozenges. The late 1800s were essentially one big, unregulated party. One of the most famous was Vin Mariani, a wine mixed with coca leaves created by a French chemist named Angelo Mariani in 1863. This stuff was huge. Pope Leo XIII gave it an award and appeared in its advertising. Thomas Edison endorsed it. Queen Victoria drank it. Presidents, inventors, and celebrities were all publicly drinking cocaine wine and saying it was great for their health. Mariani became wildly wealthy and handed out medals to famous people who endorsed his product. The marketing was genius. Get famous people to say they love your cocaine wine, then use their testimonials to sell more cocaine wine. It's the same playbook we use today, just with less cocaine, usually. Now we get to the part everyone knows a little bit about. Usually from that one friend who brings it up at parties. Yes, Coca-Cola originally contained cocaine. Let's talk about how that happened. In 1885, an Atlanta pharmacist named John Pemberton created a beverage he called Pemberton's French Wine Coca. It was basically his version of Vin Mariani, but then Atlanta went dry, they banned alcohol, and Pemberton had to reformulate. So he removed the wine, added some sugar, carbonated it, mixed in some cola nut extract for caffeine, kept the coca leaf extract with its cocaine, and created Coca-Cola. The original marketing called it a brain tonic and cure for headaches, exhaustion, and nervousness. People loved it. Why wouldn't they? It was a refreshing beverage that also happened to contain cocaine. That's solid product design right there. Now, here's the important context. There wasn't that much cocaine in each serving. We're talking about small amounts, especially compared to someone taking pure cocaine medicinally. But it was there, and it definitely contributed to the drink's early popularity. Coca-Cola was marketed as a sophisticated temperance drink, something for people who didn't want alcohol but still wanted a little boost. As public opinion on cocaine started shifting in the early 1900s, Coca-Cola quietly changed their formula. By 1903, they were using spent coca leaves that had already had the cocaine extracted from them. They kept the name because brand recognition is important even when your brand is named after a drug you no longer include. The company still uses coca leaf extract today for flavoring, but it's completely cocaine-free. The coca leaves are processed by a single company in New Jersey that's licensed to import them, and the cocaine is extracted and sold to pharmaceutical companies. Waste not, want not. So what changed? Why did everyone go from cocaine for babies to cocaine is destroying society in the span of about 20 years? Several things happened. First, people started noticing that cocaine was actually really addictive. Shocking, I know. Those miracle cures wore off, and people found themselves needing more and more to feel the same effects. Doctors started seeing patients with serious problems: paranoia, psychosis, heart issues, and full-blown addiction. The miracle drug was starting to look a lot less miraculous. Second, cocaine use became associated with specific groups that the white establishment wanted to demonize anyway. There were horrific, racist propaganda campaigns claiming that cocaine made black men violent and superhuman, which was used to justify increased police violence and discriminatory laws. These campaigns were based on absolutely nothing but racism, but they were effective in turning public opinion against cocaine. Similarly, cocaine use among immigrant communities and the urban poor was sensationalized in the press. It was fine when respectable doctors and middle-class white people were using it, but once it became associated with people society wanted to control, suddenly it was a menace that needed to be criminalized. Third, the medical community started admitting they might have gotten a bit carried away. The American Medical Association began warning against cocaine use. Research showed it was dangerous. The wonder drug era was ending, and doctors were getting more cautious about what they prescribed, partly because of cocaine and partly because of similar disasters with morphine and heroin. Yes, heroin was also marketed as a medicine. The early 1900s were a journey. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1,914 inches. The United States essentially made cocaine illegal for non-medical use, though it was framed as a tax regulation. This was the beginning of the drug war, though nobody called it that yet. Other countries followed suit. Cocaine went from being in everything to being banned almost everywhere. For a few decades, cocaine kind of disappeared from mainstream culture. It was still available on the black market, but it was nowhere near as popular as it had been. Amphetamines became the stimulant of choice for a while because they were legal and, initially, considered safe. History is a flat circle. Then came the 1,970 seconds and 80 seconds. Cocaine made a massive comeback, especially in America. This was a different era with different cocaine. This wasn't medical cocaine or coca wine. This was recreational cocaine, and it was everywhere in popular culture. For a brief, shining moment, cocaine was the drug of wealthy elites, musicians, Wall Street types, and Hollywood celebrities. It was expensive, glamorous, and everywhere. Studio 54, the famous New York nightclub, allegedly had a man-in-the-moon statue with a cocaine spoon. The 80 seconds were excessive in ways that are hard to even comprehend today. People were doing cocaine at work. Cocaine was in movies, music, and TV shows. It was the decade's personality. But then crack cocaine appeared in the mid-1,980 seconds. A cheaper, smokable form of cocaine that created a more intense but shorter-lived high. It spread rapidly through poor urban communities, and the reaction was swift and brutal. The crack epidemic led to harsh mandatory minimum sentences that disproportionately affected black communities. Even though powder cocaine used more by white people received much lighter sentences. The same drug, different forms, wildly different legal consequences. The racism that had helped criminalize cocaine in the first place came back with a vengeance. The drug war escalated massively. Billions of dollars were spent on enforcement, incarceration, and militarization of police. Lives were destroyed, communities were devastated, and cocaine use continued anyway. The drug war became its own disaster, often causing more harm than the drugs themselves. Today, cocaine remains illegal almost everywhere. Classified as a Schedule II drug in the United States, meaning it has high abuse potential, but some recognized medical use. It's still used occasionally in medical settings as a local anesthetic, particularly in nasal and throat surgeries. So yes, your doctor can legally give you cocaine, but you definitely can't give yourself cocaine. Despite being illegal for over a century, cocaine remains one of the most commonly used recreational drugs in the world. Millions of people use it regularly. Production, mostly in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, continues at massive scales. The illegal cocaine trade is worth tens of billions of dollars annually and is controlled by cartels that have caused immeasurable violence and suffering. The story of cocaine is really a story about humans and our complicated relationship with substances that make us feel good. We discovered a plant that gave us energy and relief. We isolated its active compound and convinced ourselves it was a miracle cure. We put it in everything from soft drinks to baby medicine. We made fortunes from it. Then we criminalized it, launched wars over it, incarcerated millions because of it, and somehow never quite figured out how to actually address the underlying issues around addiction and drug use. We went from one extreme, cocaine for everyone, including infants, to another extreme, mandatory minimum prison sentences and militarized drug enforcement. And through it all, from the Inca Empire to modern times, people have continued using cocaine because that's what humans do. We find things that make us feel different, and we use them, whether they're legal or not. The history of cocaine is bonkers because it shows how quickly societies can completely change their minds about substances, often for reasons that have more to do with politics, racism, and economics than actual science or public health. It's a reminder that common sense about drugs is often neither common nor sense, and that our current drug policies aren't inevitable. They're just what we decided to do at a particular moment in history. So next time you see a vintage Coca-Cola ad or hear someone mention Freud, remember, we're living in the timeline where we decided cocaine was bad. But we very easily could have been living in the timeline where cocaine toothache drops were still available at CVS. Thank goodness for the FDA, I guess? Though they did approve OxyContin, so maybe thank goodness is too strong. And that's the history of cocaine, from sacred leaf to medicine to menace, featuring the Pope, Sigmund Freud, and a soft drink company that still uses the name of a drug they no longer include. It's been a wild ride, and we didn't even need to chew any coca leaves to get through it.